We welcome the Labour Appeal Court judgment, which was delivered earlier today regarding the ongoing labour strike led by Nehawu. I also want to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues in the cabinet, the former acting minister for the Department of Public Service and Administration, and the new minister, the former minister being Minister Tulas Nasi, and the new minister, Minister Notolo Kivit, for having pursued this matter with the courts in a very passionate way. And I believe this was in protection of vulnerable members of the community who depend solely on the public service for their health services. There is no doubt that the strike has disrupted provision of essential health services in the country, leading to untold suffering and frustrations amongst the public who desperately needed healthcare services and treatment, and those who depend solely on the public health services for their health needs. The court judgment concurs with the view of our ministry and the department, which we have always held, that essential services workers are prohibited from engaging in disruptive industrial action, which is detrimental to the healthcare services with the risk of loss of life as provided by the Labour Relations Act. It is for this reason that Parliament enacted the Labour Relations Act in line with the Bill of Rights, whilst the Act itself makes provision in line with the Bill of Rights for withdrawal of labour in general where there is a disagreement. However, in so doing, Parliament, in enacting this law, excluded essential services from this right. In order to protect the rights of essential services workers, the law creates mechanisms for deadlock breaking through mediation, conciliation, and arbitration in case there is disagreements through the Public Service Bargaining Council in terms of the public service, but also in terms of essential services outside the public service. It is regrettable to us, it is regrettable that this strike action has gone for quite some time, for just over a week, causing untold hardship and pain, frustration, and even possible loss of life, as we have indicated, cases where we are still investigating the direct link between the deaths and the disruptions, especially withdrawing essential health service workers from their workplaces. We believe that this could have been avoided. And we are saying also that we believe it is inconceivable that the leadership of the trade union Nehawu were oblivious of the provisions of our law in this regard. So that's why we believe that this should have been avoided, because the main party, which was instrumental, we believe the leadership was well aware of the provisions of our law, which prohibits essential workers, especially in the health sector, from going into disruptive labor action. The court order unequivocally calls on Nehawu leadership to inform and call on all their essential services members to return to work with immediate effect. In consideration of the practicality, we have given the workers in the health sector until tomorrow morning to report to work. Because although the court said with immediate effect, we considered the fact that it will be difficult for many to return to work immediately. So in consideration of that, we are giving allowance up to tomorrow morning for those who must report to duty tomorrow morning. Failing which, those who are expected to report and don't report will be in contempt of the court ruling. And therefore, they will be putting themselves liable to face charges of misconduct. We want to reiterate this call as stipulated both in the court order and also by the Department of Public Service and Administration earlier today in a circular number 11 of 2023, which draws from the decision of the Labour Court. And just to quote what the circular quoted from the decision of the Labour Court, the order of the Labour Court, that's what it's called, the orders of the Labour Court, which says, I quote, the strike action, picket, or any other form of industrial action by Nehawu, its members and employees who are employed in the essential services as defined in section 61, subsection 1D of the Labour Relations Act, briefing. 66 of 1995, which commenced on the 6th of March 2023, is interdicted with immediate effect. And I want to repeat, with immediate effect. And that's why I've said that we have made consideration of that by saying the workers should report earliest tomorrow morning. And Nehawu and all such essential services employees are restrained and prevented from continuing with or participating in any such strike, picket, or any other form of industrial action. Further quoting the order, Nehawu is ordered to inform its members and officials and all persons to whom it had given notice of the strike in every province, including but not limited to every hospital.
You are muted.
Minister, you are muted. Minister, you are muted.
Oh, my apology. Mistakenly, my apology to that. These things happen. Just to repeat, following the order, Nehawu is ordered to inform its members and officials and all persons to whom it had given notice of the strike in every province, including but not limited to every hospital and clinic in South Africa at which it has members within essential services, inform them of this order of the court through publication on social media, by email, and by all other appropriate means available to it by no later than 13 hours today on the 13th of March 2023. Now, as already indicated, any employee who fails to comply with this court order will be committing an act of misconduct subject to disciplinary action, including possible dismissal. Any person committing any criminal acts in pursuit of the strike action will be subjected to criminal proceedings by the law enforcement agencies. Over and above what is stated, all managers are obliged in terms of the Labour Relations Act to apply the principle of no work, no pay, and this should be applied with immediate effect. We urge all the workers in the health sector, as defined in the court order, to report to their workplaces tomorrow morning. Lastly, we would want to apologize to all South Africans for the inconvenience and the hardships, pain and humiliation and suffering which have been caused by this strike. And we hope that a strike of this nature is not going to repeat again. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mohale. I hope you're still there.
Yes, I'm still here, Honorable Minister. I want to say it upfront that in the next 15 minutes, I'll be load-shedded. So if I disappear, my colleague, Dr. Swale, will continue until I try to find the reconnection. So on that note, thanks, Minister, for that brief update. I've got very few questions that I'm going to pose them to you, and I believe the Deputy Minister and other senior officials who have joined, they will assist to respond to those. So I've got 8 questions so far. The first one is what necessitated deployment of SANDF at Telemukweran and other hospitals across the country, number one. Number two, When were the soldiers deployed at these health facilities, hospitals in particular? Number 3, how long or until when will these soldiers or SANDF members be at these facilities? Number 4, how many of them have been deployed in all these hospitals across the country? Next question, what kind of duties are these deployed soldiers performing? Is it medical, security, or both? What kind of duties are they performing? Question number 6, how many of them were deployed in each and every province or institution? For how long? The question number 7, most of these questions are around the deployment of members of SANDF. When will the National Department of Health when did the National Department of Health send a request to SANDF and the Office of the President to request the deployment of the Army at these health facilities? Question number 8, how many people have lost life since the beginning of the strike? So this is the first batch of questions I have received so far, Honorable Minister, even though I know you might have touched on some of these questions during the statement, but feel free to just emphasize on them. Back to you, Minister and colleagues.
Well, thank you very much, Foster. Well, the statement, because it dealt largely with the court order, we did not deal with these matters. Well, I've said it over and over again during the course of the day that one, just to answer in full, starting from the questioner goes into various aspects. Firstly, to say that we made a request on Tuesday through the Minister of Defense to request the military health services. Military health services. There's a division within the SANDF called the South African Military Health Services, which is made up of doctors, nurses, and other health professionals within the Army who provide services for the military when they are in operation and also at the military hospitals. So that's the request which we made. At the time, it was because we were informed that at that time, the Tsepong Klerksdorp area was under quite a stress when many of the health workers, especially the nurses, had not reported for duty. So that's the first area where we asked for deployment of the military health services to assist us. So once, 2 days later, when we were informed that the situation in that area had stabilized, we then requested that the contingent of the military health services we asked if they could be moved to other areas of stress, which was largely in the Gauteng area. So that's the request which we made. That must have been on Thursday that we made that request that the Northwest Klerksdorp area is stable. Can we get the contingent to assist in the hospitals in the Gauteng area? So that request was received by the minister, and she then agreed to help and communicated to the leaders of the military health. Military health is under the administrative leadership of the Surgeon General, who's the sort of your head of department within the military health service. So that is the basis. So this was purely for medical support, especially we asked specifically, especially for nursing, because although they do have other health professionals, including doctors, but our major stress in the hospitals was nurses. So while I will not want to go into the numbers, I know the person who questions want the details of numbers breakdown, that I will not go into. But just to say that it was a small contingent because they also have limited personnel. So it was a small contingent, but very helpful in terms of where, the hospital, especially for inpatients, those who are in the wards, when there were no people to provide medication, to provide cleaning of patients, feeding of patients. So it was really for medical support. So in terms of duties, I've indicated is nursing, exclusively nursing. But of course, once they're in the hospital, they will also do other duties because, even if they've come in for nursing, in terms of having to collect food and feed patients, that's part of the well-being of a patient, in a hospital. So in terms of those who would have been there for protection, as people might have seen, that although we are saying that these were mainly medical and especially nursing personnel, but because they are military personnel, they also, to provide security cover, their colleagues on the other side of the normal military will also be in attendance to provide the security, even though, you know that in most cases, the ordinary security is provided by members of South African Police Service. But because these personnel are military personnel, although health, to guarantee their protection, their colleagues in the general military would also be around just to make sure that they have adequate protection. The question of how long, as we have seen, for instance, with the Klerksdorp, in a particular health facility, once the situation is stable, we inform the minister, and the minister will then transmit the message to the Surgeon General, and these colleagues will then move. If we don't require the services anymore, they will throw to their barracks and to the military hospitals, where they most of the time are. So we've already seen that happening in Klerksdorp. They were there for 2 days. Once a significant number of normal personnel, especially nursing staff, returned, we requested that this place is stable. So the same thing will happen currently in Gauteng, Telemogerane. Some were also earmarked to assist at Sebokeng Hospital, and all those, once there is stability, those military health personnel will move on. So as I've already touched on that in terms of when the request was made, which was last week, Tuesday on the 7th. Duties, I've mentioned that. How long, it will depend on the need, and as soon as the situation stabilizes, we thank them and indicate to their leadership through the Minister of Defense that they can retreat to their area or where they are based, which is in the military hospitals or in their barracks. The loss of life, we've already indicated that thus far there have been 4 which had been reported. There have been further reports, but we didn't want to elaborate further until we get full confirmation from the clinical staff in terms of the direct linkage between those who passed away and the conditions, over and above the fact that it is under circumstances where the necessary medical personnel were not on duty, and we need to directly investigate further and link. And I've said earlier today that as and when more information comes and more confirmation of the direct linkage, when that is concrete, we will be able to share that publicly. I think I'll leave it there, Foster. I think I've dealt with because mostly it was the SANDF or the military health services in proper terms. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for all the responses. I've got the last 2 questions before I get load shedded. The next 4 questions. What happens if Nehawu decides to appeal the court judgment? Next question, what is the role of the Department of Health in the salary negotiations to mitigate the impact of Nehawu strike? The last 2 questions, what is the implication of the Labour Court judgment with regards to the provincial, with the court interdicts that were secured by a number of provincial health departments? So does this Labour Court judgment nullifies all the court interdicts secured by the provincial health departments? The last question, what's your message to Nehawu leaders with regards to the implementation of this court judgment? Over to you, Minister.
Thank you very much. I suggest that we don't prolong. If it's fine, we could leave it to these questions. In terms of what will happen if Nehawu appeals, my own information from our legal advice is that once you've reached the appeal court, which is in this case the Labour Appeal Court, the only other avenue is the Constitutional Court. And even if there was to be an appeal to the Constitutional Court, because this also confirms actual application, I mean, the execution of the interdict. So even in the event that there is maybe an attempt to go to the Concord, this order of the appeals court will still stand to be executed. So that's our understanding. But I would also hope that Nehawu does not go that route. But at least from our own legal advice, they have confirmed to us that that is the case, that an order of the appeal court of this nature will remain applicable and executable, irrespective of what happens if there's an attempted appeal to the Concord. The role of the department in the negotiations, our department is part of the mandating committee of government, and we do have representation in the Public Service Bargaining Council, but we are there as a member of the collective of government through the Public Service Bargaining Council. So we don't have a direct role as a single party to engage on our own in any discussions in terms of salary negotiations and any other work, privileges or rights of the staff. It's all taking place within the Public Service Bargaining Council. The implication in terms of the provincial court orders, well, I'm not an expert in that regard, but my understanding is that the overall, there is concurrence in terms of the various court orders. They all sought to, firstly, some were limited to stopping disruptions inside the premises, stopping the violence, the gathering, which stops workers from coming into the hospitals and health facilities, and also the users of our facilities. Some were generally limited to that. So the appeal court is a higher court, so it supersedes, but also it embraces all those. It goes further than most of the high court rulings which had been obtained. So it's an overriding court because it's also a higher court. In terms of my message to the leadership of Nehawu is to say that I think there's been enough suffering, enough pain, enough frustrations amongst ordinary South Africans. One would appeal to them that let's bring this to an end. The door is open. The Public Service Bargaining Council is proceeding. That's a legally available forum through which all the issues of which remain to be discussed should be ventilated there. And one would therefore appeal to the leadership to go back to the bargaining council so that these matters can be ventilated there, and an agreement ultimately can be hammered there, so that we allow ordinary South Africans to receive the very life-saving treatments which they require from the public health services. So that's my message. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Minister. I'm still safe.
All right, that wraps up that briefing by the Department of Health calling for an end to the strike. The workers, essential workers that is, who are on strike have until tomorrow to report for duty.
Yeah, that's after a court interdict was reaffirmed by the appeals court. Thank you for being with us on The Full View. A very good night to you.